Alright. End of the week, let's check my homework, and why not my YouTube channel? So apparently you guys really like Tink. Let's talk about that. Hello everyone! After the success of the last Tink video, I thought I might as well continue with the story time regarding Tink, or as he was originally numbered T1NK59-773, and talk about the first session in which Tink ever was used, or entered the picture of 40K. The game began roughly around a year and a half ago. The plan was to have a party of roughly 5 players for the first session. Instead, there was just me and Calzone, a player who had never even heard of the 41st millennium until now. Vincent, my DM, had been in 40K for quite some time, but had never DM'd an RPG for it. I think I was actually the only veteran, having only played a single Rogue Trader game before this one. And, well, generally wanting to play something a bit crazier and more out there, I wrote up a character known as Tink, the heretek himself. Though he didn't quite start like that. Originally, he was an explorator from Metallica, reasonably respected, but with a bit of a secret that he had an interest in xenotech, usually disassembling it, trying to understand its machine spirits, and having a nasty tendency of starting to install some of its tech into his servo skulls, which he had many of, seeing as, quite literally, it was one of his pastimes to decapitate and refurbish old, unused skulls. But regardless, the game started up with Calzone, our new player, deciding to play an astropath. Why is beyond me. The story begins with Tink and Calzone being sent from a rogue trader house known as House Galdaris. We were sent to go investigate one of their investments they had made about 20 years ago. They hadn't responded for a good decade now, and, well, we could only assume for the worst. Calzone, an astropath, was sent with me with one of their top tech priests, not only make sure that production and excavation of their project was going well, but also that I could send back messages as soon as possible. We were in a ship, flying through a hurricane, with one engine dying, slowly but surely heading towards the jungle floor of Decius 9. So things were starting great. A little bit of panicking, my character runs into the cockpit, demanding to know what is happening. Apparently, some sort of weird storm had started to envelop this side of the planet, and had struck one of our engines. Looking at the window, we slowly saw sparks coming off, and we realized that if anything hadn't been done, we soon would be crash landing. But that is what servo skulls are for, and with a few well-placed plugs, and a very lucky roll on my behalf, we managed to at least limp our way through the storm, finally seeing the planet of Decius 9 below us. In the far distance was a large mountain-like structure, at least a kilometer long in length, and at least half a kilometer high. Roughly about a 20-kilometer distance away from that, separated by jungle and unfestered forest, was a large concrete encampment, bearing the colors of House Galadria. It would have been a nice thing to admire, if we weren't panicking about whether or not our pilot would actually get us there. Fortunately, he did, but I think it would have been a much more interesting story if he had failed, to be honest. As we stepped out, we were greeted by the commissar, the general, and several other soldiers. It seemed pretty standard fare as they began to explain to us what the situation was. You see, they were sent here about a decade, maybe 2 decades ago, by House Galadria to uncover a lost ship, a light cruiser, one from the Horus Heresy. We didn't know who it had belonged to, but from what few expeditions have been taken inside of the ship, it seemed that it at least belonged to somebody of immense wealth at some point. When hearing this news, the gears inside of Tink's head began to whir. Calzone just looked at me very strangely and started wondering why this player he had never seen was starting to freak out and get all excited. I recomposed myself and quickly looked back to the general and the commissar, Tink politely asked, "Why exactly are you running late on your schedule? After all, you said that they could get this thing into orbit within 10 years. They both looked to each other with a rather, I don't know what kind of look, to be honest, of both fear and acknowledgement, and politely asked for the astropath and the tech priest, that was Tink, to follow. As we began to walk over, I handed over what few bits and pieces of my kit over to my two servo skulls, telling them to hide my gear. We were taken over to what seemed to be some kind of research tent on the edge. As we were walking over, they started to explain that we've been having trouble with the inhabitants. Tink laughed, simply asking why they simply hadn't just shot them already, or better yet, burned down the forest. But that seemed to get an even worse look from them. They simply said that it was best we see it for ourselves. The tent flap opened to us, and after a bit of bickering with what seemed to be two other tech priests of lower rank than me, they moved aside, showing us what could only be described as an Aztec disc. It was in an encaged enclosure, and was made of what looked to be some sort of black marble. It was jagged, pointed at multiple points, and was floating 3 feet off the ground, currently chained by multiple adamantine chains. Calzone was thrilled. I, on the other hand, was terrified. As a player, I knew what I was looking at, and probably some of you already know too. But Tink didn't. For although Tink is a heretek, and has probably seen more than his fair share of horrors in the galaxy, he has not actually come face to face with the ruinous powers. He began to inspect it with his probes, his long mechadendrites and servo skulls, looking for any sort of port of entry. Whatever kind of technology this was, he thought, it doesn't seem to be human. This seems to be almost organic in nature, he thought. As he looked further and further, no port could be found. I politely asked Calzone to do a quick scan of the object, giving us a clear idea that there was some kind of psychic link between this thing and something else in the next room. The commissar ordered us to follow, showing us the disc's owner. On the table, what could only be described as a chimera, an amalgamation of vulture and human. In its left hand, we saw a black staff, made of very similar black marble. As Tink began to approach the thing, its biology was all wrong. The body was covered in feathers of blue. The eye was eerie, sickly green, and its toes and fingers were clawed and taloned. Tink wasn't a biologist, but he never came across a Xenos race like this before. When he began to question the commissar simply told him that this was, quote-unquote, riding the object in the other room, and that apparently it had taken a cannon shell to kill it. Lasgun blasts simply bounced off, or seemed to detonate early when shot. As I started to question more and more, Calzone got more interested and tried to touch the thing. Touching is never a good thing in 40K. And as his fingers brushed against the feathers, the body began to twitch. Calzone quickly realizing, as his psychic senses went out, that there was clearly something inside this thing. As the body began to wriggle and jerk on the table, I might have made a horrible decision. I may not know much as Tink. I don't know much about the 40K universe. And mind you, this was before Tink started taking drugs. But the one thing I did know was that bodies that started moving on their own after they were dead with several bullet holes in them is never a good thing. As the DM was midway describing how it began to bend over its back, starting to arch over, I said I shoot it. I shoot it with my bolter. Did I mention this was Vincent's first time DMing? He shrugged and said roll damage. 10 plus 4. The corpse was eviscerated in a single detonation from my bolter. And as the body turned into a fine crimson gelatinous jelly, I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that I had in fact stopped a very horrible event from happening. Perception check. I fail. What I had failed to see was that the hand that was holding the onyx staff was still twitching. The onyx staff, from what we could tell, had been fused to the hand itself, and was starting to incinerate the hand. As we began to chat and laugh a little bit at our mutual terror, there was a slow chunk, 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 chunk sound. Tune in next time to figure out how this horrifying event will turn out. And be prepared for demons. Fucking